Hello friends, welcome back to Indian Polity series. And this lecture is presented by me, Rahul Das, and this lecture is about historical background of Indian Constitution. So in this lecture, we will see some of the historical backgrounds of Indian Constitution. So let us start our discussion. These are the topics of discussion. British rule in India can be divided into two different periods. So the first period can be called the company rule, and the second period can be called the crown rule. Now, under company rule, various acts were formulated to administer India, and some other acts were formulated during the crown rule to administer the country. We will discuss all these acts, but in different parts of the lecture. So this is the first part of the lecture, and in this part we will discuss the Regulating Act of 1773 and the BITS India Act of 1784. So let's start. So our first act is the Regulating Act of 1773. Now, this act is of great constitutional importance. Why? Because it was the first step taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. So before this act, East India Company was independent and it was free to conduct its own affairs. It was independent to conduct its own affairs, and British government had no control over East India Company. Act of East India Company. But this act was the first step taken by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of East India Company in India. Now, this act also recognized for the first time the political and administrative functions of the company, and it laid the foundations of central administration in India. So this is quite important. Regulating Act of 1773 laid the foundations of central administration in India. This is the point to remember. Now, what are the features of the Regulating Act of 1773? Now, these are some of the features. It designated the Governor of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal. So, Governor of Bengal was designated as the Governor General of Bengal and created an executive council of 4 members to assist him. So, Governor General of Bengal was designated as Governor of Bengal was designated as Governor General of Bengal, and an executive council of 4 members was created to assist him. And the first such Governor General was Lord Warren Hastings. So all these points are very important. It made the governors of Bombay and Madras presidencies subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal. Unlike earlier, when the 3 presidencies were independent of one another. So earlier they used to have 3 presidencies, that is Calcutta Presidency, Bombay Presidency, and Madras Presidency. These presidencies are the important areas of administration of British in India, and they were independent of one another. But after Regulating Act of 1773, Bombay Presidency and Madras Presidencies were made subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal. Now, this act also provided for the establishment of a Supreme Court at Calcutta in 1774, comprising 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. So, Supreme Court was established by the Regulating Act of 1773, and the court was established at Calcutta in 1774, and it included 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. This act also prohibited the servants of the company from engaging in any private trade or accepting presents or bribes from natives. This was a provision of the act, but in reality it was not followed because there were corrupt officials of the company, and they used to take bribes and they used to take gifts from the natives. Natives here means that the inhabitants of India, that is the mostly the princes. So the employees of the company or the servants of the company used to take bribes, and they used to take gifts from the princes. But this act prohibited accepting bribes and gifts from the natives. By moving forward, this regulating act also strengthened the control of the British government over the company by requiring the code of directors, that is the governing body of the company, to report on its revenue, civil, and military affairs in India. So, British government started strengthening its control over the affairs of the East India Company, and by this act it made mandatory for the court of directors, that is the governing body of the company, to report on the revenues of the company, to report on the civil and military affairs in India. So this was the Regulating Act of 1773, quite an important act, and all these points are very important for prelims. So please remember and learn all the features and the initial introductory points about Regulating Act of 1773. Now coming to Pitt's India Act of 1784. Now, features of this act, it distinguished between the commercial and political functions of the company. This is important. Earlier, commercial and political functions of the company were not distinguished. Now, this act distinguished the commercial and political. So, commercial functions and political functions of the company will be separate. It allowed the court of directors to manage the commercial affairs, but created a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs. Thus, it established a system of double government. So earlier, uh, this court of directors, that is the governing body of the company, used to look after the commercial as well as the political functions of the company. But now, the Spitz India Act of 1784 made a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs, and court of directors were to manage the commercial affairs. So commercial and political functions of the company got separated, and it established a kind of double government in India. It empowered the Board of Control to supervise and direct all operations of the civil and military government or revenues of the British possessions in India. So, Board of Control were given some of the powers. They were to supervise and direct all the operations of civil and military government, and also of the revenues of the British possessions in India. Now, this act was very significant for two reasons. First, the company's territories in India were for the first time called the British possessions in India. Okay, so here we can see in the third feature that this British possession has been used. So this was the first time that British possession was used for companies' territories in India. And the second important point about Pitt's India Act is that the British government was given the supreme control over the company's affairs and its administration in India. Okay, so these are the features of the Pitt's India Act. Now, see you in the next part of the lecture. That is part 2 of the lecture. Thank you so much.